Hello, and thank you for tuning in to learn more about Reimagine DART. Today, I'll provide a quick overview of what Reimagine DART is, the changes that we are proposing, the impact of those changes on those who use DART services, as well as the community overall, and our next steps and when you might see these changes take effect. So we are designing a new bus network from scratch because we know a lot has changed in our region over the last decade. It's been more than a decade since DART designed a completely new bus network, and how and where people are traveling has changed a lot. Our region has grown, work and how people and when people are working has changed. In addition, we need to maximize limited resources by ensuring that we're tailoring services to really meet clear goals of our member communities. And by doing so, we hope to ensure that we're providing value to all of our communities here in Central Iowa who choose to participate in our regional transit system so that they continue to invest in our regional transit network. As we started on the path of designing a new bus network, we really had to ask two big questions. How much transit service can the region afford, and how do we allocate those resources that we have? When we tackled the question of how much transit service the region can afford, that was really a conversation that we had with our local elected officials and, in particular, the DART Commission. The DART Commission is the governing body for our organization. They set our budget, they have the property tax levying authority, and they adopt policies that then DART staff are responsible for carrying out. The DART Commission has one elected official from every community that participates in DART that serves on that governing body for us. So when we were tackling the question of how much transit service the region can afford, we looked at several different budget scenarios for the commission to consider. The best case scenario was that we would be able to maintain the same amount of service that we provide today. Unfortunately, with the environment that we're in, where costs have increased and revenues aren't keeping pace, we're not at a moment in time where we can look at expanding service. The commission also had to consider scenarios that would reduce the amount of service DART provides by up to 20% or more. And the reason that we're not expanding service and we're looking at reductions in service is partly because of how DART is funded. Public transit is a public service that requires taxpayer funding, just like other services that we fund with our tax dollars. Roads, parks, bridges, trails, schools, emergency services, all of those things require taxpayer funding. Whether we use them or not, they're really part of what makes our community a great place to live and work. So DART's budget is about 67% funded from local property taxes. And it's the Iowa legislature that determines what mechanism we can use to fund public transit. So the legislature decided that we would use property taxes to fund transit in Iowa. And then the DART Commission has the ability to decide how much property taxes each community will contribute towards DART's total budget. We know when we talk about property taxes that those revenue streams are used to fund a lot of different services in our communities. So we want to make sure people understand that the transit levy is really only about 1 to 2% of a homeowner's total property tax bill. So throughout the region, on average, for a $200,000 homeowner, the property tax bill is between $50 and $100 per year. So we developed these budget scenarios for the commission to consider, and the DART Commission ultimately directed us to design a new bus network that maintains 90% of current service levels. And what that means is that we have designed a proposed new bus network that has 10% less total hours of service than what we provide today. And that really is in order to help limit property tax revenue growth while also working to maintain as much service as we can. The second question that we had to grapple with is how do we allocate the transit resources that we have? And in order to help inform a decision on that, we collected robust public input throughout the spring on two very different ways we could approach designing a new bus network based on two different goals. One goal being if we had a goal of high ridership, meaning we want to provide as many trips on transit and our service as possible. We know that across the country, there is a correlation between high frequency service and high ridership. It's really high frequency when the bus comes 15 minutes or better that drives that high ridership. So if ridership and getting a lot of people to use transit is our goal, we would design a system that has fewer routes with more frequent service. On the other end of the spectrum is a goal of high coverage, which is really more of a lifeline type service because you're providing service in a lot of different places in the region. So more areas have some access to transit, but because you're spreading those resources out, the bus does not come very often. And so in this coverage goal, is making sure that a lot of places have some access to transit, but because the bus doesn't come very often, not a lot of people can afford to wait an hour for a bus to come and make their trip. That means it's not going to generate a lot of ridership. So we shared two concepts with the public and our elected officials in April, and the feedback we heard was that 47% of riders prefer a high ridership network, fewer bus routes running more often in the busiest areas of the region. We heard 24% preferred a coverage network and 29% preferred a mix of the two options. So we shared that feedback with the DART Commission, and in June, the Commission directed us to design a new bus network that prioritized ridership for the region overall, but included coverage services for three communities that preferred coverage, and those were Ankeny, Altoona, and Clive. And then the Commission also asked us, as I shared, to design a network with 10% less service than what we provide today in order to help limit property tax revenue growth. So that is the direction that we used in designing a proposed new bus network. Before I share the details of that network, I want to share a little bit more about some of the key features. Because we really leaned into the direction to have a ridership network for the region overall, you will see fewer routes with higher frequency in some key areas of the region. We also know that people are traveling more all throughout the day and all throughout the week. And so there is our service, and this proposed new network really reflects more consistent service throughout the day and throughout the week. We also looked at ways that we could help people travel farther faster. And I'll talk a little bit about how time transfers are going to reduce the time it takes to transfer from one bus to the next, reducing travel time, how bus stop spacing can help speed up travel time to provide faster service overall. We are going to talk about how we're investing in significantly more weekend bus service, which is something we've heard our riders would really like. And then we did look at how do we reduce service by about that 10% that we were requested. And in order to do that, we are proposing by reducing the hours of service we provide on weekdays by 2 total hours and 1 less hour on Saturdays. So it helps to start by looking at our current bus network and the services that we are providing today. It's important to note that the color of the lines on the map indicate different levels of frequency, how often the bus is coming. The red colors mean the bus is coming 15 minutes or faster. Purple on this map is 20-minute service. The bus comes every 20 minutes. Dark blue means the bus is coming every 30 minutes. Light blue is every 60 minutes, and then there's a lot of tan lines on this map. And those are routes that are operating during what we call peak only service. And that's those traditional like morning and evening commuter hours during weekdays only. And so our current network has 27 fixed bus routes, but about half of those routes are only running for a few trips in the morning and a few trips in the evening on weekdays. They do not run on weekends. And so, one thing about our current network to know is the service, how often the buses come, and when that route is running is not consistent across the network throughout the day or throughout the week. And that's something that we are addressing in the proposed new bus network. So what you see here is we do have fewer routes, but the routes are darker, and that means we have more consistent, frequent service all throughout the day and all throughout the week. So we have 10 main routes and 4 key corridors in the region that will have that 15-minute service throughout the day and throughout the week. We'll have 15-minute service from Dart Central Station downtown heading east on University to Hubble. We will also have 15-minute service heading west on University all the way to Valley West Mall. We have 15-minute service from downtown on Ingersoll up to 42nd Street. And we have 15-minute service from downtown to Polk County River Place along Martin Luther King Parkway. Many of the other routes that you see in this network are dark blue, which means that the bus comes every 30 minutes. We only have 2 routes in this network that operate hourly. That's the Route 8 in South Des Moines, covering parts of Park Avenue, Fleur, Watrous, and then heading over to some apartments in the South Gate area. And then we have an hourly service from Park Fair Mall up to Ankeny that helps connect Ankeny and downtown, as well as provide some local route service within the city of Ankeny. We do also have 3 microtransit zones, and those are in the communities that expressed a preference for coverage: Ankeny, Altoona, and Clive. And we'll talk a little bit more about how those microtransit zones would work. One route I want to highlight in the network is a new Route 4, and that's a big loop that starts downtown and travels in both directions, and hits a lot of key destinations throughout the region. One piece of feedback we have heard over the years is that people would like to have opportunities to travel in the region without having to come into downtown and transfer back out. And that's really what this Route 4 is intended to do, because there's a lot of places throughout the region that people can get on the Route 4. There's a lot of destinations people can get to without having to come all the way into downtown. So the route starts in downtown and heads in both directions. From downtown heading west, it travels along Ingersoll, and then on to Grand, and then comes into the Valley Junction area in West Des Moines, and then travels back north from Valley Junction along 8th Street, where it goes to the Walmart in Windsor Heights. Then it takes University Boulevard and heads north on 86th Street, where it reaches the Urbandale Library, Food Pantry, and City Hall. And then it continues on to Merle Mall, hits the VA Hospital, Polk County River Place, Park Fair Mall, and then comes back into downtown on Southeast 14th Street, going by the Capitol Complex through the East Village on Grand Avenue. So it hits a lot of key destinations throughout the region, as well as connects with several other routes. There's a lot happening in this network that you can't see just from looking at the map. One thing I mentioned earlier is time transfers. We are planning to schedule these routes so that many of the routes will come into Dart Central Station at the same time. They will wait for 5 or 10 minutes. So if someone is traveling from one route to the next, they have 5 to 10 minutes to get off their bus and get to another bus at Dart Central Station before that bus leaves. And that really should help shorten the transfer window for many trips that need to transfer in our network. Today, we do not have time transfers at Dart Central Station, so if you're traveling into Dart Central Station and connecting to another route, you may have to wait 15, 20, or even 30 minutes or more before your other route comes into the station and you can leave. So time transfers is one way we're looking at speeding up overall travel times. The other way is looking at bus stop spacing. And this is something we asked about in our public input and survey in the spring. And we heard from 72% of riders that they would prefer wider bus stop spacing, even if it means a slightly longer walk to the bus stop. And I think the reason for that is that we know if we have wider stop spacing, the buses don't have to stop as often on the route, and that means they can travel faster and be more reliable. Today, our bus stops are spaced about every 1 to 2 blocks. So, what we're proposing is that bus stops be spaced about 3 to 4 blocks so that the buses can travel faster and be more reliable. We are also proposing the service and the frequency that you see on that map is really consistent throughout the day and throughout the week, which is very different from our current network today. So that frequent 15 and 30-minute service on weekdays would be available for 12 hours throughout the bulk of the day. On Saturdays and Sundays, that frequent 15 and 30-minute service would be available for 8 hours throughout the service day. And the Saturday and Sunday service is a significant increase compared to what we provide today. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So, really consistent service throughout the day is part of this proposal. We are proposing some changes in when service is operating and available. And this is because we knew we had to reduce total hours of service we provide by about 10%. In order to look at how do we reduce service, we really looked at our ridership data to see how could we reduce service at times of day or in places that would have the least amount of impact on people. And what we saw in looking at our ridership data is we have the fewest number of trips on the system in the very first hour of the day and the very last hour of the day. So what we are proposing is that our service starts 1 hour later and ends 1 hour earlier on weekdays. So in this new network, the weekday service would be from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Today it's about 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. On Saturdays, we're proposing to end service 1 hour earlier. So Saturday service would run from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. instead of 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. And there's no change in hours of service on Sunday. We would continue to have service from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Want to share a little bit more about the microtransit zones that we have in several communities in our system. Before I talk about how those zones are designed to work, I want to share just a little bit about what microtransit is in general. If you've ever used a taxi or an Uber or a Lyft, microtransit is very similar. It's really a door-to-door trip. And if you think about a taxi service that is picking someone up at their house and taking them to the door of their destination, there's only so many trips that a taxi or an Uber can fulfill in 1 hour because you're doing those door-to-door trips. And so we know, looking at data from across the country, that microtransit can fulfill about 2 to 4 trips per vehicle per hour, which is a lot fewer than the number of people that we carry on fixed route. On average, on fixed route, we carry about 18 passengers per hour today. So this is not a service that's designed to get a lot of ridership, but it is designed to be able to cover a wider area of a community with some service. But as we look at how we design the service, we have really looked at how could we design the service to cover a wide area, but still fulfill as many trips as possible. So what we're proposing is that for all three of the microtransit zones in this proposed draft network, a rider could book a trip either on the app or by calling DART customer service between the hours of 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. on weekdays. This service is not available on evenings or weekends. An individual may wait up to 30 minutes for their ride, and then they would be potentially directed to walk up to a quarter mile to be picked up at the corner of a main street, and then could be dropped off at one of several key destinations. And so what we're looking at is really using something we're calling virtual bus stops to help make sure that we can maximize the number of trips that we can serve. So if I am trying to take a microtransit trip and I plug in my home address, if I don't live on a main street, I might just be directed to walk to the closest main street corner to meet the bus there in order to keep the bus just on main streets where it can fulfill more trips more efficiently. So once I get picked up from that main street corner, I can go to one of several what we're calling hubs, and there's multiple key destinations within each hub. So in this microtransit zone that you're seeing on the screen, The shaded light purple area is all areas where you could get picked up from a main street corner and taken to one of these hubs that is highlighted in a purple symbol. And each hub, for the most part, could have multiple destinations. So if I'm trying to travel to Douglas and Northwest 86th Street area, that hub, I could choose to go and get dropped off at the Urbandale Library, at the Hy-Vee, or at the Aldi. The other way that this microtransit service is really designed is to not just to help people get to these key destinations in these communities, but also to help connect people into the fixed route bus network where they can travel all throughout the region. And so in this microtransit zone, there are several hubs along the Route 3 and 3L where folks can get from a Main Street corner to a bus stop to connect to that route and get into downtown or go to Jordan Creek. And there's also two hubs along 86th Street where people can connect to the Route 4 and travel to a lot of different key destinations in the region. So this is a lot of change, and we recognize that, and we know change can be hard, and learning new bus routes will take time. But we also know that we need to maximize the services we're providing and to try to provide the very best service we can with the resources we have. And so as we look at making this amount of change, we want to ensure that we understand how this change impacts our riders and our community. And there's two ways that we have worked to measure the impact of these proposed changes. One is by measuring access, which is really looking at how far can someone travel within 45 minutes on DART service. So we looked at how far someone can travel from a lot of different points throughout the region using our current network and using the proposed new network to see how the two compare. And here we are looking at an example of how far someone can travel if they're at Polk County River Place. So this is showing if I'm at Polk County River Place on our existing network, this bubble is where all the places I can reach within 45 minutes on our current network. And this includes the 45-minute window includes the time it takes to walk to your bus stop, to wait for the bus, and to ride the bus. Then we also looked at how far could someone travel from Polk County River Place on the proposed new network, and that's what this blue bubble is showing. We overlaid the two to see where is there a gain in access and where is there a loss in access. The red shading is highlighting where there is a loss in access. You can see there are some places that you can no longer travel to from Polk County River Place within 45 minutes, but the blue shaded areas are where there is a gain in access. And there's more blue shaded areas than red shaded areas. And when we add up the change, we can see that from Polk County River Place, I can reach 19% more jobs and destinations on the new network than the current network. And we can also see that 19% more residents can reach Polk County River Place on the new network within 45 minutes. So we also did this analysis from DART Central Station, and this is showing where someone can get from DART Central Station within 45 minutes on the current network. This is showing where someone can get within 45 minutes on the new network. And when we overlay the two, we can see the red shaded areas again are where there is a loss in access. The blue shaded areas are where there is a gain in access. And when we average them out, we can see that from DART Central Station, I can reach 7.5% more jobs and destinations, and that 4.5% more residents can reach DART Central Station within 45 minutes on the proposed new network. So this analysis was done all throughout our service area to see where is there a gain in access and where is there a loss in access. Each dot on this map represents 50 people. The green is indicating that there is a gain in access, and the darker the color, the darker the gain in access is. The brown or tan shaded dots are showing where there is a loss in access. And again, the darker the color, the greater the loss. What's important to note is that while there is green and brown, which means there is a gain in access and a loss in access, there's a lot more green than there is brown. So overall, throughout the network, there's a gain in access to transit services and how far people can travel within 45 minutes. And when we average this out all throughout the region, we can see that the average resident can reach 21% more jobs and destinations within 45 minutes on the draft network compared to the existing network. The other way that we have measured the impact of these changes is just by looking at how many residents in our service area live within a half mile of a bus stop. And so this top row here is showing the existing network, and the colors again indicate frequency. The second row is showing the proposed new network and what percentage of residents have access to service. You can see here that in the existing network, 4% of residents have access to frequent 15-minute service, whereas in the proposed new network, 11% of residents would have access to frequent 15-minute service. So we increased the number of residents that have access to frequent service by 7%. And then we also see an increase in the number of residents that have access to more frequent 30-minute service. And then we also see that 5% of more residents are just near any transit service. And that is really due to adding some of those additional microtransit zones. So 51% of residents in our service area have some access to transit, and more residents have more access to frequent service. We also wanted to take a look at Sundays because I mentioned earlier that we are providing more weekend service. So these maps are showing what our Sunday service looks like today in the existing network and what Sunday service would look like in the draft network. You can see again in the draft network that the lines are darker, which means that we are providing that 15 and 30-minute frequent service on Sunday. Whereas today, all of our Sunday service, except for one route, is hourly, and some of the service it comes, only every 80 minutes or so. So as a result of investing in more frequent, consistent service on Sundays, we see 11% more residents have access to 15-minute service, and 30% of more residents have access to 30-minute service. So significant increase in weekend service in the proposed changes. So what's next? Right now, we are collecting input and we really want to hear from riders and members of the public what they like about these proposed changes and anything they would like us to reconsider. And you can provide us that feedback by going to reimaginedartdsm.com to both learn more. We do have an interactive map on the website where you can see proposed bus stop locations and how far you may need to walk to get to your bus stop. And then we want you to take the survey and give us your feedback and tell us what you like and what you want us to reconsider. We will be going through all of that feedback in early October, identifying major themes where we're hearing similar feedback from a lot of different people and determining what changes we might need to make to this draft network before we ask the DART Board of Commissioners to approve a final network in December. And we need to approve a final network in December so that we have time to start to prepare and implement these changes. Our plan is for the new bus routes to take effect in the summer of 2026, and then for the new microtransit zones to take effect in the fall of 2026. There will be a lot of communication and information shared ahead of when these changes take effect. We'll be providing lots of training to help riders get comfortable with what new routes they need to take and what the schedules of those routes are. So stay tuned for a lot more to come this spring ahead of the changes taking effect next summer. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate your attention and care for the service that DART is providing to our community. We hope you'll take time to learn more by visiting reimaginedartdsm.com and then completing the survey.